Okay guys, so even though I may not be here in your classroom with you physically, that doesn't mean that we can take a day off. So what I've done for you is you should all have a note sheet that looks like this in front of you. It's just like a note sheet we would do in class normally. And so throughout watching this video, what will happen is, you'll hear me explain these things and you'll know what information it is that we're using to fill in this note sheet. The substitute does have copies of this filled in if you're having a hard time or if you're struggling with anything. However, I think some of you know this, looking at a filled in note sheet isn't the same as hearing it being explained to you. So what I recommend is trying your best to kind of fill in this note sheet from the video, but you should be listening, okay? And one of the pros of this is that you can pause it when you need to. You can rewind and re-listen to something if you need to. All that good stuff, okay? So like I said, you should have this note sheet in front of you. It looks like every other note sheet we've done this year. Your essential question for today is, how can I find the domain of a relation? How can I find the range of a relation? And so like I always say, before we concern ourselves or before we worry about the how, we really need to know the what, okay? And lucky for you, domain and range is something that you've been working with for a long time. You just haven't learned that that's what it's called. So the domain of a relation is all of the x values or the input of a relation, okay? So domain is simply just all the x values, okay? We use the word input because that's what gets put into the relation, and then the output is what we get out. The range is all of the y values, or the output of a relation, okay? So domain are your x values, range is your y values. It's a pretty easy idea to understand. However, a lot of people get those mixed up. I don't really have like a super special trick to help you remember which one is which. The closest thing I can give you is that when you say the word range, you kind of sound like there's a Y in it. Range. I don't know. Okay, so that's the what. So when we're writing domain and range, okay, well, not me, but people in the math community, we're going to be picky as to how it's written because you're writing a set, which is just a fancy math word for a list of things. So there's a couple rules, kind of like grammar in English, that we follow when we're writing domain and range. The first rule, and I'm going to move this a little bit, zoom in. So the first rule is that we use braces around the list, and braces are these fancy little brackets. I am terrible at drawing them. You will see this later today, but just try your best. Mine look bad. Yours don't have to look perfect. We write them in order from least to greatest, aka smallest and I'm off the page. Smallest to biggest, okay? So what that will mean for a lot of you is when you get to negative numbers, you might forget that -7 is smaller than -3. So be on the lookout for that. Just some other minor rules. We put a comma between each number. And then the last two are really important. We do not repeat numbers, and we do not include anything that doesn't belong. So I think of this as kind of like a grocery list. you don't need to repeat things. If you need to get bread at the grocery store, you don't need to put bread on your list 4 times. Once is enough. And if you put something on your grocery list that doesn't belong, you might get in trouble with someone, maybe your parents or something. You know, if they tell you to go to the store and get bread, milk, and eggs, and you come back with Doritos or Takis or Skittles, you know, they might be upset because that's not what they told you to get. Okay? So we don't repeat anything, and we don't put anything in there that doesn't belong, that doesn't fit, that isn't actually there. Okay? So that's a lot of like the background information that you need to know. So now we can actually worry ourselves about, okay, how do we find domain and range? And so I figured that I would start with a graph, because we're familiar with working with graphs. We just did a whole bunch with graphs. So I'm focusing right now just on that domain question right here. And so when we're looking at a graph and we have a bunch of coordinate points and we're trying to write the domain, I tell you to scan the x-axis. And what I mean by that is to pretend for a second, and you can use your hand or a pencil, but you're going to be scanning across this x-axis. And every time you hit a dot, you'll write down the x value, because that's part of the domain. And so you just kind of scan across this way. If you start with the negative numbers, then your list will already be from least to greatest, or from smallest to biggest. So that's what I do. So if you watch me, and I literally make sound effects too, I'll start with my little brace. Boop! Oh, here's a dot. -5. I'm going to keep going. Boop! Here's a dot. Oh, at 1. Boop! Here's another dot. Oh, at 2. Boop! Here's another dot. At 3. And if I keep going, there's no more dots. So that's my domain. -5, 1, 2, 3. Because those are the x values at each of those dots. Notice how all I looked at was the x value, the number on the x-axis that these points were at. I did not care about the y value. Okay? So just like with domain, where we're just focused on the x value and we're scanning the x-axis, with range, oops, we're doing the same thing, but now we're scanning the y-axis. And again, if you start with the negative numbers and go up, your list will already be in order from least to greatest. Okay, so we're going to do the same kind of thing. Start with my brace, and here I go, I'm working up. Oh, boop. Alright, so I've got 2 dots here where the y value is -2. I don't need to write -2 twice. I'm just going to write it 1 time. Because like we said, we don't repeat numbers. So I'm going to put -2 for those 2 dots. And then I'm going up. Boop. Oh, stop again at 2. And if I go up again, oh, stop at 5. So my range for that set of points is -2, 2, and 5. -2 and 2 are not the same number. Okay, so for some of you that might be saying that I repeated it, I really didn't. Okay, -2 and 2 are different. So that is domain and range from a graph. Okay, you might think that I sound silly or that I sound dumb, but I'm telling you, if you use your finger or you use your hand and you literally scan and stop yourself at every dot, okay, there's no way that you can get the answer wrong. So keep that in mind. Alright, on the back, we just have a couple more examples, and these are, like I said, the other way, or with the other ones, these are really easy too. So here's a table, which you're used to seeing, okay? And so when you're trying to find the domain in a table, you're just going to circle all the x values. And lucky for you, it's labeled. The x values are in the x column, so it's all of these numbers right here. Also lucky for you, a lot of times they're written in order, especially the x values. The y values maybe not, but x values are. With this example, we just didn't get lucky. But when we go to write this domain, the smallest number we have here is -3. That one's in. Okay. Then 2. Then 5. Then 8. And I put little check marks beside those numbers just to double check myself. Okay, I put those in. I put that in. Okay, that's all. So our domain for that table is -3, 2, 5, 8. Okay? Not so bad, right? If we move on to this one next to it where it wants range, it's the same idea. Remember, range are your y values, so when you're trying to find the range of a table, you're going to do the same thing. You would circle your y values. And so now it's just, okay, how do I write these numbers in order from smallest to biggest? If I look, okay, I've got -3 again, and that's my smallest. And then 1, and then 7, and last but not least 10. So again, I put those little check marks by those numbers when I wrote them in my list so that I did not forget anything. Okay? So domain and range, very similar. The hardest part is remembering which one is which. And again, I told you when you say that word range, it kind of sounds like you're saying y in there, so that might help. Okay, so now we move to a list of ordered pairs. And so although you may have never seen something exactly like this, you're familiar with working with ordered pairs because those are just the coordinate points that we talk about. So I'm looking at that example where they want the domain. And I say the same thing. I say circle the x values. And I mean that. If you remember, ordered pairs are written as x comma y. And so what that means is all the x values are the first numbers in these ordered pairs. So I'm going to circle those first numbers. 2, 7, -5, and 4. And so those are the 4 numbers that are going to go into my list. Now I just need to worry about writing them in order. I start with my brace. -5 is my smallest. Oh, and then 2. And then 4. And last but not least, 7. So again, I'm putting those little check marks by those numbers just to double check myself and to remember that, oh yeah, nope, I did put those in. Okay? That's domain. Now if we look at range, again, it's the same kind of idea, but now we have to remember that range is our y values. So if we remember that ordered pairs are written as x comma y, y is the second number. So I'm going to do the same thing, but now I'm circling the second number in those ordered pairs. I have 7, 1, -8, and 3. And so now I'm just writing my list. If I start with the smallest, my smallest is going to be -8. Got that. And then 1. Got it. And then 3. And lastly 7. So my range is -8, 1, 3, and 7. Okay? So that's domain and range of ordered pairs. Again, I don't think that it's extremely difficult. It's just important to remember which one is which. Okay? And so now there is one last little piece to this. And it's how can you find the range from an equation? And so we've been working with equations a lot. And so you might be asked to say, you might be asked, what is the range of y equals -4x plus 2 if the domain is -2, 1, 6? Now, if you remember, domain are the x values, or the input of a relation, and range is the output. So if you're already, one step ahead, you might think, oh, well, to find the output, I need to put in the input. And you're right. When we get to examples like this, all we're going to be doing is substituting the domain values for x. So my equation is y equals negative 4x plus 2. I'm going to be plugging in each of these domain values to get my output, or to get my range. So that just means that I'm doing kind of a lot of work. It's not that much work though. I'm going to copy my equation up here just so that I can remind myself what it is that I'm doing. Okay? And so my first domain value is negative 2. So I'm going to plug that in. Y equals negative 4x, I'm putting in negative 2, plus 2. Negative 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 plus 2 is negative 6. I just made a mistake. Negative 4 times negative 2 is going to be positive 8, and positive 8 plus 2 is going to be 10. See? Even adults make mistakes. But I don't want you to make that mistake. That's important. That was a big mistake. Okay. If I go ahead with my next one, again, negative 4 times, now my x, I'm going to put in 1, because that's the second number in my domain, plus 2. Negative 4 times 1 is negative 4, plus 2 is negative 2. So I've got two numbers so far, 10 and negative 2. And my last one, I have my domain value of 6, so I'll have negative 4 times 6 plus 2. Negative 4 times 6 is negative 24, plus 2 is negative 22. So I plugged in negative 2, 1, and 6 for x, because those were my three numbers in my domain. And when I did the math, I got 10, negative 2, and negative 22. Those are the values in my range. Okay? And so now, when I go to write my range, I just need to put them in order. Negative 22 is my smallest, then negative 2, and lastly but not least, positive 10. Okay? So that's it. Okay, those are the notes that I have for you today. Like I said, the substitute does have a filled-in copy of these if you were struggling to, fill something in, or if you couldn't see something. But again, if you listen to this whole thing, you have an explanation, okay? Just be careful with the activity that you're going to be completing today, to pay attention to whether the question is asking for domain or if it's asking for range, okay? Because that will make a difference. And lastly, make sure you don't forget your integer rules. And like I made my mistake up here, negative 4 times negative 2, you want to make sure that that's a positive number. So just be careful with things like that. Okay? I will see you on Thursday for any kind of follow-up questions that you may have. You also have your assessment on Thursday. So again, make sure you're reviewing that study guide and, finishing up any homework that you need to. And if you have questions, make sure you're coming to class on Thursday with questions so that I can answer them for you. Okay? Good luck!